All right, welcome in everybody to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and specifically, we're going to be going a little deeper than just the headlines you see, about how they've been interacting recently after their divorce,
Okay.
and kind of tying that into how that all relates to Affleck's recent split with Jennifer Lopez.
Got it.
And our main source for this is going to be a Fox News article. It was published pretty recently, December 9th, 2024. And, when I was reading through this article, I was kind of surprised, to find that there's actually a lot more to this story than I thought there would be.
Really?
Yeah, it's not just your typical, celebrity gossip.
Okay, well, I'm intrigued now. Let's dive in.
Yeah, so one of the first things that really jumped out at me in this article was, obviously they're talking about Affleck and Garner and how they've been seen together and they've been interacting. But the way that they talk about, their co-parenting dynamic, it's really interesting. It's not just saying, oh, they're doing a good job, co-parenting. It's like, it seems like they're going above and beyond.
It sounds like they're actively choosing to put their children's needs first, which is, not always easy to do, especially when you've gone through a divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the fact that they've both spoken publicly about that,
Yeah,
about putting their kids first.
that says a lot.
I mean, that shows a level of maturity and understanding, especially with all, the pressures of being in the public eye.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it. In Hollywood, everything is magnified, right? So for them to make that conscious decision to put their kids first,
Yeah.
it really speaks volumes.
And the article mentions how they spent Thanksgiving together
Oh, wow.
with their kids while J-Lo is with her family.
Yeah, it's definitely not the typical, messy post-breakup scenario we often see with celebrities.
No.
It suggests they've managed to maintain a certain level of respect and perhaps even friendship, which is really refreshing to see.
Yeah, and it actually makes you wonder, what does it mean, like, to be there for each other?
That's a great question.
Because the article quotes a source close to Affleck, and the source says that Garner has been there for him, as he navigates life post-split from Jennifer Lopez.
I see.
So, like, what does that actually look like, you know?
Well, if you think about it, we know that Garner has a history of being there for Affleck. Even stepping in to help him with his struggles with addiction in the past.
Yeah, back in 2018.
Exactly. So it seems like their bond goes beyond just, a typical Hollywood friendship. There's a real sense of care and support there.
Well, and then it's interesting because you have that going on, and then on that same weekend that Affleck and Garner were spotted together, J-Lo posts these pictures of herself in this really, like, daring outfit.
Oh, interesting.
And a lot of people are calling it a revenge dress. So it makes you wonder, is that really what it is?
Yeah. It's tempting to draw that conclusion, right? I mean, we've seen this narrative play out so many times in pop culture.
Yeah.
But, it's also possible that Lopez is just expressing herself, as she always has,
Yeah.
independent of anything going on with Affleck.
It's a good point. We can't always assume we know the full story.
Exactly.
And the article also mentions Affleck's, well-documented dislike of paparazzi, right?
Right.
And how he even recently went on Kevin Hart's show and was talking about feeling shy, and disliking all the excessive attention.
That's interesting. It's not the image that usually comes to mind when you think of a Hollywood A-lister.
No, it's like you don't usually think of, like, a movie star as being shy.
Right, exactly.
It kind of challenges those assumptions that we have.
It really humanizes him.
Yeah.
Reminds us that they're just people too, dealing with their own anxieties.
And, it's interesting to think about their history, too, because, like, Affleck and Garner, they met way back on the set of Pearl Harbor.
Wow.
In 2000.
A long time ago.
So, I mean, their relationship has literally spanned over 2 decades, from co-stars to spouses to co-parents who are trying to navigate all of this.
It really makes you think about how relationships can evolve over time.
Yeah.
They clearly have this deep connection that goes beyond just romance.
And it's like, what can we actually learn from that?
Right. What does that tell us about the nature of human connection?
Yeah, and I'm curious, like, in this article, are there specific things that stand out to you that really highlight that evolution in their relationship?
Well, I think one of the most telling moments was Garner's interview in Vanity Fair back in 2016,
Okay, yeah.
where even after their separation, she referred to Affleck as, quote, the love of her life.
Yeah.
I mean, that speaks volumes about the kind of bond they share, even outside of a romantic context.
It's so true. And it just makes you think about how many different forms of love there are out there
Absolutely.
and how relationships can really defy those easy categories.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that's so interesting about this whole story.
Yeah.
We're challenging those simplistic narratives of happily ever after or bitter exes
Hmm.
and recognizing that, relationships are complex.
Yeah.
People are complex.
Mm.
And things aren't always black and white.
And then you have their kids, because the article mentions that, the kids love having both parents together,
Yeah.
even for holidays like Thanksgiving. So, like, how do you think this unconventional family structure, might impact them as they grow up?
Well, the research is pretty clear on this. Kids benefit greatly from having both parents actively involved in their lives.
Even after a divorce.
Exactly. When parents can put their differences aside and prioritize their children's needs, it creates a much more stable and secure environment for them to thrive in.
So, in a way, it seems like Affleck and Garner are kind of modeling a new way of approaching family life.
Absolutely. It's not the traditional model, but it seems to be working for them.
It's a powerful message that really goes beyond just celebrity gossip.
It really does.
And it speaks to the idea that, even in the most challenging circumstances, people can find a way to make things work.
Yeah, it's inspiring. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode 2024-12-10. Part 2 of 3. It's funny, right? Like when you read this article, they really do try to make you see Affleck in a different light.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And we were just talking about like how much he doesn't like all the attention in the spotlight, right?
Right.
And the article talks about, how he was on Kevin Hart's show and he was explaining, all those pictures of him where it looks like he's angry at the paparazzi.
Yeah.
He's saying it's not about the photographers themselves. It's more about just like the feeling of constantly being watched and judged.
It makes sense. I can't even imagine,
Yeah.
especially with, kids involved too.
Yeah, exactly. And he was
Wow.
saying it's even worse, when he's out with his kids.
I can see that.
And it's like, he's trying to protect them. So it's like, I don't know, it just kind of makes him seem more like human.
It does. It makes you realize that, even these huge celebrities still have to deal with normal everyday anxieties.
Totally. And so then it makes you think, about Garner and how she's been there for him through all of this, right? Because it's not just like, oh, they're friends, they're hanging out. Like the article makes it very clear that she has been like a constant source of support for him.
It seems like a very deep level of understanding between them.
Oh, yeah.
To recognize that his well-being is so intertwined with their children's well-being. It's, quite remarkable.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, how much of that comes from just having this, like, shared history,
Yeah.
Because the article even brings up, that Vanity Fair interview that Garner did back in 2016.
Oh, right, after the separation.
Yeah, where even after they had separated, she was referring to Affleck as the love of her life.
Yeah, I remember that.
And it's like, a lot of people were talking about that, at the time, but it really does challenge this idea that, like, all relationships, have to end in either like this fairy tale ending or this horrible, bitter, resentment. It's
Exactly.
like, no, there's this whole other space in between where people can still, you know, care for each other and support each other, even if they're not romantically involved anymore.
Right, and it seems like they've found a way to do that.
Yeah.
And it's working for them.
Yeah, and so then it makes you think like, okay, so what does that mean for their kids? Right. Because the article does talk about how much the kids enjoy having both parents present,
Of course.
for things like Thanksgiving.
And, there's a lot of research that backs that up, actually. Kids really do benefit from having both parents involved.
Even after a divorce.
Yeah, even after a divorce. When parents are able to put their own, differences aside and focus on what's best for the kids, it creates this sense of stability.
It's like they have this solid foundation.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think that's so important for kids.
It is. And, it's almost like, in a way, Affleck and Garner are showing us a different way to approach family.
Yeah, like a different way of thinking about it.
Right. It's not traditional, but it's clearly working for them.
Yeah, and I think it's really inspiring for people to see that, because it's like, life throws curveballs, things happen.
Things happen.
But that doesn't mean you have to just give up.
It's about adapting
Yeah.
and finding a way to make it work.
Exactly. And this article talks about how Affleck, he's very open about wanting to be a good father. And he's also talked about his struggles with addiction and how that's impacted his family.
That takes a lot of courage to be that open about those things.
Yeah, definitely. It's like he's trying to break those negative cycles.
Yeah, that self-awareness is really important.
It is.
Recognizing those patterns and actively working to change them is huge.
So it's like we started this whole deep dive thinking, okay, it's going to be about, Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner and J-Lo.
A typical celebrity story.
Yeah, but it's actually become so much more than that, you know?
It really has.
It's like we're learning about human nature and relationships and all these bigger things.
It's about the human experience.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how all these themes are intertwined, you know?
It is.
It just shows you that there's always more to the story than what you see on the surface.
So we've talked about, Affleck's struggles, Garner's support, the unique family dynamic they've created.
Right.
But there is one piece of this puzzle that we haven't really talked about yet.
Oh, you mean?
Jennifer Lopez.
Yes.
So in the next part, we're going to dive into that. Like, how does she factor into all of this? And what can we learn from, her behavior post-breakup?
I'm curious to see where this goes.
Yeah, so stay with us because we're going to unpack all of that in part 3. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode, 2024-12-10, part 3 of 3.
Okay, so we've been talking about this whole, Ben and Jen situation.
Right, a lot of layers here.
Yeah, and we can't really wrap things up without talking about J-Lo.
True.
Because, the article does mention that she posted those pictures of herself.
Oh, yeah, the revenge dress photos.
Yeah, and it was like right after all those pictures came out of Affleck and Garner together.
Oh, wait, right when everyone was talking about him.
So it's like, come on, you can't help but wonder, right?
Like, of course, it's natural to make that connection.
But is that really like a fair assumption to make?
Well, I think we have to be careful about reading too much into things.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in that whole narrative of like, oh, she's trying to get back at him.
Yeah.
But there's a whole other side to this.
So you're saying it might not be about revenge at all?
It might not be. I mean, think about it. She's always been known for her style.
Her bold fashion choices. It's
Wow.
part of who she is. So maybe this was just J-Lo being J-Lo,
Expressing herself.
Exactly. And we have to remember, we're only seeing a tiny sliver of their lives.
Right. It's also curated.
Exactly. Like, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes, what conversations they might be having.
What their actual motivations are.
Right. And this brings us back to that idea of public perception versus reality, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Just like with Affleck's shyness, we assume we know these people, but do we really?
Exactly. There's always more to the story.
And it's interesting because the article itself doesn't really, push that revenge dress narrative,
Yeah, I noticed that too.
It's almost like they're trying to encourage us to think a little deeper.
To question those assumptions.
Yeah, and that's kind of been a theme throughout this whole deep dive, hasn't it?
Absolutely. It's about looking beyond the surface,
Yeah.
considering all sides of the story.
So how do we make sense of all this then? Like J-Lo in this, daring outfit, but at the same time, she and Affleck are reportedly still on good terms.
It's complicated, right?
Yeah.
But I think it shows that even after a high-profile relationship ends, there can still be room for growth and evolution.
You're saying there can be respect and understanding even after the romance is gone.
Exactly.
It's definitely not the typical Hollywood breakup story.
Not at all. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We're challenging those easy narratives. We're acknowledging the complexity of human relationships.
Because even in Hollywood, where everything seems so, over the top and glamorous,
Right, like a fantasy world.
there's still those very real, relatable experiences,
Of heartbreak and growth.
and people trying to figure things out.
Yeah, it's a reminder that life is messy.
It is.
Relationships are messy.
And that's okay.
It is. And
Yeah.
even in the midst of all that messiness, there's still hope.
Yeah, there's still that potential for connection.
Exactly. And for growth.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive for today.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
It has, from Ben and Jen to J-Lo and everything in between.
Who knew there was so much to unpack?
I know, right?
And, I think the biggest takeaway for me is that there's always more to the story than meets the eye.
That's so true.
And that even in the world of celebrities, there are valuable lessons to be learned about the human experience.
Absolutely. We hope you enjoyed this deep dive, and maybe it's given you something to think about.
Yeah, maybe even inspired you to look a little deeper into the stories around you.
Thanks for listening.